Hopology, stories of hope, healing, and resilience. I'm your host, Christina McKelvey. Today we speak with Sonia. She's the founder of Everbloom, an online platform that helps provide support with alcohol recovery through community. We explore her own personal story about recovery and how she saw the need for that increased community support, which led her to create Everbloom. Please join us as we delve into this interesting topic about sobriety and what that means. We'll be right back. Welcome to Hopology, stories of hope, healing, and resilience. I'm your host, Christina McKelvey. Today we're going to be speaking to Sonia from Everbloom. How are you doing, Sonia?
I'm really good, Christina. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's a little warm. It is the summer, and
yeah,
at least where I'm from, it's really warm.
Yeah, it's beautiful here. I'm in Pennsylvania.
Okay, Pennsylvania. Yeah, I've been having this weird, I don't know if it's weird, but I have been having this fascination with wanting to visit the East Coast, like Vermont, Rhode Island, Cape Cod.
Yeah.
And I've been getting Instagram ads because I think Instagram reads your mind.
Yeah, so it does read your mind.
So just tons of ads about the East Coast. So I'll have to make it out there. The furthest east I've been was Maryland, and it was lovely. I was in Chesapeake Bay. I think that's how you say it.
Yeah, Chesapeake. Yeah.
Yeah, and blue water crabs. It was great. So it's the furthest east I've ever been.
Have to do a fall East Coast trip is amazing.
Yes. Okay. Well, I am writing that down, and I will travel out to the East Coast one of these falls, or more recent, because the summer here where I'm at on the West Coast is torturous. So Sonia, tell me a little bit about, yourself, or tell our audiences a little bit about yourself and your platform, Everbloom.
Yeah, so I'm Sonia, and I've been in recovery for 6 years. And originally I was an orthodontist, and I built a really big practice. And the whole time I was building it, I was just drinking more and more to deal with the stress. And when I sold the business, I got sober and I was doing really well, but it wasn't really out and proud with my sobriety. And most of the reason was, I think my husband at the time wasn't super comfortable with that idea that his wife was like an addict, right? And so, and thought it sort of like, had this stigma if I said I'm sober. And so a lot of times I would notice like he would jump in and tell people, oh, she doesn't drink, and I didn't really get into the sober thing, but time went on.
Expand on that. Okay.
Yeah, he wouldn't expand on it. And then, like you just know instinctively not to, you know what I mean? What you're like, okay, I'm not going to expand on it either, because I think there was a reason, does it that way. And so, yeah, then I started to kind of get more into it. I started writing a little bit about my sobriety. I started making images, and they got into galleries, and the writing was getting published. And I think the more that happened, probably the more uncomfortable he became. And after 18 years, he got up and left, like without any warning.
Sorry. Oh, man.
I know, it was devastating. And so when that happened, I thought there's absolutely no way I'm going to stay sober. And there's no reason, because my life has been like blown to pieces. So the first few weeks were just so tough, and I really didn't know if I was going to make it without drinking. And I really did just go back to the one day at a time, which I hadn't done in 5 years. And while I was doing that, I thought, I really need a sober community. Like, I need support from people that have gone through, like, not necessarily the exact same thing, but something similar, like a really tough situation, and had to kind of maintain their sobriety. And also, I'm pretty introverted, and I didn't want to talk in a big group with people I didn't know. So I was like, is there any way that there's like a consistent group that I would see like every week, the same people, so I didn't have to go through my like sob story every time. Like, I was sober 5 years and then my husband left, and then, and so it would be nice if people knew that. And so kind of like friends, right? Like my friends, I didn't have to like go into it, each time. And I looked and I really couldn't find it. And so I thought, if I'm going through this, right? And I was so lucky. I had like 5 years of sobriety. I had a super strong support system with my family. I was financially stable. I cannot imagine if any of those things weren't there, how much more difficult this would be. And it's got to be something that other people are looking for. And so, yeah, I kind of did a lot of research and was like, I really don't need to start another business, but let me check out and see if it's out there. And it wasn't. And so I just slowly started interviewing people in recovery, really trying to like solidify the fact that it wasn't out there. It wasn't. And so I made it.
You saw a need and you stepped in to meet that need. It sounds like the lack of support and community for those that are continuing on with sobriety. Because it's a little different with your friends. Like you mentioned, like you had friends, but they might have not understood your journey.
And I didn't want to worry people, right? Like I didn't want to worry my family and friends by thinking I'm going to go pick up a bottle of alcohol. Like they were being so supportive in every other way that they'd been through the addiction and I didn't want to it just seemed unfair in a sense, like to bring it up and be like, hey, now you have to babysit me so I don't drink. So yeah, it's different when you have friends that my family doesn't drink a lot, but they're not sober. And I think it takes a sober person to understand that specific struggle.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point that, it's hard to connect with or understand, have empathy or insight into someone's struggle if you have not been there yourself.
Yeah, because it's like, that is my heaviest coping mechanism, right? Like things are as bad as they can get. I didn't have the coping mechanisms for something that enormous. And that's hard for people to understand, right? Who don't automatically default to like drugs and alcohol. They're like, well, why don't you, do some deep breathing? And it's like, no, it's not going to work. It's not going to work this time.
It's more than just deep breathing. It's like a really rooted thing that, probably stems from many different variables and reasons. I'm curious, how does Everbloom, the community that you created, differ from, other recovery networks such as AA?
Yeah. So I think one is that it's not a program, right? It's just kind of groups of people giving each other support. And I think the biggest thing that's different is like AA, for example, like one of their main rules is no crosstalk, right? And so to me, that's no feedback, no conversation. And that's really what I needed. And I think it's sort of a different, like almost more modern approach, right? Like this is what we do now. We communicate and we are like free with our emotions and we're vulnerable. And I think that's really what I was struggling with, was like, I need someone to talk to. I need to have a conversation back and forth. And when someone says like, you're going to be okay, I'll be like, well, when am I going to be okay? And when they say, 3 to 6 months, and I'm like, really? Are you sure? Like you want to be able to kind of like ask the questions. And so that's different. And then also, almost every other platform is a drop-in model. And so you are just dropping into a meeting. You don't know who is going to be there. You don't know what their story is. And what I really wanted was to match people and have them create like really like real connections, like real friendships.
I was not aware of the drop-in model. I mean, I was aware of it, but it makes sense. Like it's kind of like an aha moment for me, is where AA is a drop-in model. So not knowing who's going to be there, for some individuals, that could mean a lack of sense of safety.
For sure, right? And especially depending on where you live in the country, AA is so different. Like it can be one way in like New York City and another way in like Arizona. Like you just don't know what you're getting into. And then it's like, well, if you don't find what you're looking for, what do you do?
You don't find what you're looking for, what do? You do what you did.
Yeah, that's one idea. Yeah. Or you know, if you have like, for example, like But there are people that live in areas where for me, it's not feasible necessarily to create a sober network in, rural Pennsylvania of like 10 other, 15 other women. Like that's not going to happen. And so it's really for people that just want that connection.
Mm-hmm. You bring up a good point with, in a rural community, you may not find in person 10 women who have similar stories, similar backgrounds. I live in a relatively rural area of Arizona, and it's, the same thing. I hear a lot from my clients, like there's not anyone that understands. So then you go onto social media or the internet and you find like-minded communities. And I think that's one of the positives of social media, is that being able to connect with others from around the world, whereas before you weren't able to necessarily do that.
Yeah. And I'm not like necessarily old school, but I do think there's like limitations to like a Facebook group, right?
True.
Like the conversation like we're having now. But I love it. We have a Slack channel at Everbloom, and when people are struggling, they will jump on and like ask for advice. But again, it's like from people they know, right? It's not like, random person jumping in being like, hey, why don't you just try having 3 glasses of wine tonight? It's like, what? No, I'm not going to try that.
So how is Everbloom set up? You mentioned you have a Slack channel. Like when someone joins Everbloom, what does that look like?
Yeah. So when they join, their options are they can have like a 5-minute kind of chat with me. So I get an idea of what they're looking for, or also they can fill out a pretty in-depth questionnaire about what they're looking for. And then we'll match them into a group that we think fits their needs the best. And haven't had a miss yet. And so, the groups are very cohesive, not necessarily demographically, like they're all ages and races, but they're struggling with something very similar. So, a lot of them are like in the first 6 months of sobriety, and that's a really unique experience. We have a group of people that are healthcare workers. That's a really unique experience. And so whatever it is that you're struggling with, that's kind of causing you to like either re-examine your relationship with alcohol, get sober, stay sober, whatever that is.
And how has Everbloom changed you specifically? As a founder, but also, I'm assuming you're very engaged in the groups itself.
I mean, I don't know if you feel like this because with the podcast, but it's like, no, you're a therapist. You do. I never found what I was like meant to do. Like I never felt connected being an orthodontist. And I maybe at some level knew I was missing some passion, but not really. Like I just was like, oh, well, this is what I went to school to do, and this is what I'm going to do. And so I think it like fulfills something in me that I didn't even know was missing to like a great extent. And so, it's changed like in every way. Like there's no like end to the day, right? If someone's having trouble or someone sends me an email, like I'm responding. It doesn't matter, what time it is. And so, things like that, I think it's different, that it's more like a passion project in a sense than a like 9 to 5 kind of job, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And there's that like, and I don't think I felt this way about teeth, which is,
like not teeth.
No, but it's like, if I could help one person, that's enough. Like that is the goal, is to help one person figure out what the problem is with alcohol. If they can drink, if they can't drink, if they want to get sober. And so, I think it's just has a different weight.
A different weight.
Yeah. That's what it feels like. It feels like every person that comes through is like, or, is in a meeting is like a friend of mine. Like we're all part of the same tribe, is probably not the greatest word to use, but just we're part of the same community. Like we understand each other in a different way.
Community is such an important concept that I feel, and I've said this in every single podcast in the last 5 interviews that I've done. So weird, but it's such an important concept that I think we have forgotten here, in Western society, especially in the US.
For sure. That's really interesting. I was like talking to a friend of mine, and I recently started going, my family's in Toronto, and I started spending a lot more time there. And she said like, that's what society was about. It was about like being with your people and the people that understand and support you the most. And somehow we just kind of got away from that when we started like moving for work and moving for school. And so weren't considering that aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole go out west, young man, by yourself, was so ingrained in American society. And I don't know if there's nothing necessarily nothing wrong with having that independence, but you still lose something when you're solo.
For sure. Like I've moved so many times for school or for jobs, and you leave people behind. Like you're not taking the whole group with you, you're kind of, and some friendships don't make it through that.
Yeah. It goes back to the online platform. So you have individuals from all over the country or the world, like where?
All over the country right now. We have some people in Canada, but yeah, we're open. Like if people can make it to a meeting, you're welcome to come to a meeting. So yeah.
I love how technology can be beneficial. Like I have such a love-hate relationship, but this is just, I think, a testament of how it can be helpful, expanding that community around the US and eventually the globe.
Yeah, because there's something to like, especially with sobriety, like there's something to consistency. And so if I want to take a trip for 3 weeks, I don't want to be away from my sober community for 3 weeks. And especially, honestly, vacations are a little tough when you're sober, like especially when you're first sober and everyone's like, getting wasted. And so it's kind of nice. Like you can kind of take us with you wherever you go. If you feel like, I'm going to travel for like a month, it's like, well, you still have your sober community.
You can take them with you. They're in your pocket because it's an app, right? Or is it?
It's not an app, but it's just online. And so you can like click on from your phone and click onto a Zoom and you're there. And it's like, and we have people that will come on from like the strangest places. Like they like had to go to Walmart and they're like, I'm at Walmart, got the phone and I'm going to have it. Or like they're in their car on their way home from somewhere. And so it's like, and it's nice too, because it doesn't feel like, I feel like now, right, we're also concerned about something interfering like with the day. It's like they don't have to get dressed up. They don't have to get in the car and go somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious, what is your perspective being someone that has been in recovery for 6 years? And I know there's a lot of nuances. Every individual is different, but what would you say you feel might be one of the biggest causes of not being sober, alcohol use, substance use?
Yeah, I'm sure you have like the actual science behind it, but I think for me, like what it felt like,
and that's what matters for you.
Yeah, it feels like, and there was a genetic component, and at some point that whatever that is got triggered in me, and it was probably from trauma. Like there was some traumatic experiences when I was younger that just kind of clicked in there and I thought, oh, I have this unbelievable anxiety. It's like a soul encompassing anxiety. And when you're young and you have your first drink and it takes that away, it's like, why look any further? Right? Like I found it. I don't need to go try yoga. I found what works for me. And I think that's it. And I also think it depends too how normalized alcohol is in your family, your society. And so for me, alcohol was really normal to have around the house. And so the idea of having a problem was like not really a concept to me. Like it didn't occur to me that you could drink too much, or that would be a problem, or that you could be addicted to alcohol.
What was your aha moment with that, where you're like, oh, I might have a problem?
Yeah, it was kind of confusing because I was so high functioning, right? Like it was literally like in response to how well I was functioning, the more I drank. And so it was really tough to admit that there was a problem, and then to admit that like I had to let go of this like only coping mechanism. And, and I had seen super low functioning alcoholics my whole life. And I thought, well, that guy, like I'm not that guy, but I am that guy. I am like, that is the same thought process, the same physical process that goes through my body. It's the same thing. Like, I need a drink. And so, yeah, I think the aha moment was like, just like one hangover too many type thing. Like, I think it was like, I had known probably for about a year or two that there was a problem, right? Like, I knew I didn't feel good physically. I knew that I was saying things that I regretted the next day. I knew I was blacking out more frequently at night. And so I think it was just like one really bad hangover where I had blacked out. I had said something probably crazy. I had like a bruise on my leg, and I was so sick that I just was like, this can't be what life is, because the only way, also, I was in a cycle where if I was that hungover on like a Sunday, I would drink like brunch, right? And feel better. And I knew, I just saw it like the next few weeks like flash in front of me. And I thought, if I get rid of this hangover by drinking at brunch, I can't stop drinking today. Like, I'll have to keep drinking until I go to bed. And then the hangover I have tomorrow is going to be worse than this one. And I have to go to work. And then I'm barely going to make it through the day, just like praying I can go home and start drinking. And it just felt like, what am I doing? Like, what is my life? Like, what is it? What am I doing? I have no hobbies. I have, I wasn't super close to my family. All I was sort of concerned was like being successful at work and then coming home and drinking, being successful and coming home. And so it just wasn't working for me.
You said the more successful you got, the more you drank.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was pretty good at covering it up, but I think most people who can kind of contain their drinking to like the hours between like 7 and 10 p.m. are pretty good at covering it up during the day. But yeah, I think that's probably when you start to realize that there's a problem, is when you're kind of faced with some stress that's like beyond any. So that the work stress was like really testing my limits. And so then it was like testing my limits of how much I could drink.
I'm curious what tends to be common barriers that you've seen either for yourself or in general in regards to trying to maintain sobriety or get to the first steps of sobriety.
Yeah, for sure. It's a stigma thing. And so
not shame.
For sure. It's a shame thing. And it's, we talk about it a lot in the groups. And I think that also a lot is the like, people think the only option is to go to AA. And when you go to AA, you have to like admit you're powerless against alcohol. And I don't think as women, we feel like doing that right now, like at this in 2023. Like, I don't think we feel like saying I'm powerless against something. And, really have to commit to abstinence for the rest of your life. And there's a shame factor if, you have a slip up. And so I'm abstinent. That's my choice, but not everyone has that as a goal, and they feel uncomfortable, I think, talking about that. And so that's kind of what we do, is we give people a place to really, really, truly figure out what you want your relationship with alcohol to be going forward. And you don't have to label yourself as an addict. You don't have to label yourself as an alcoholic. All you know is you want a better, relationship with alcohol. You want a different connection to it. You don't want to use it as a crutch.
Yeah, you mentioned shame factor, the stigma, and even I'm sure they're in the community, not your community, but just in general, saying, oh, I want to limit it to once a week, or this is how I want my relationship to be, as opposed to the traditional concept of abstinence that AA preaches. I'm sure that's where there can be stigma even just there, like you mentioned, like, or judgment. Maybe there's fear of judgment.
Yeah, and you really have to wholeheartedly sort of accept AA, right? Like, you can't be half in, half out. You can't be kind of in this, like, you essentially, like, your life has like gone in a certain direction where you need intervention to get it out. And so a lot of the women in our groups are super high functioning. And so they don't have the same consequences. And so they can't sometimes relate to someone who's, on their like third or fourth DUI, which is like totally, it is what it is. To me, it's kind of all addiction, but I understand the reluctance to sort of label, yourself like that. For some reason, to me, it came easily once I got sober. It was like very easy. I'm an addict. And now it's like, a huge part of my identity is that, recovery. But I understand that not everyone wants to give it that place in their life. They just know they want to be healthier and happier.
That relationship with alcohol. And like you said, it's shaped by maybe someone's traditions with their family, society, learned coping skills, genetics. Like there's so many different nuances and variables to why someone may find themselves in a state of addiction.
Yeah. And there's a huge cultural component, right? That like, I think that is like a little underestimated that I don't have a ton of Asian people like myself in the groups. Not something you admit. You don't admit any weakness, and like certainly not to a substance, right? It's like, yeah, I think, when you hear the story of like, my dad was like, I walked 7 miles to school with no shoes. You don't have a drinking problem. Just stop drinking. Like, that's not a problem. Just stop. And so I think there is that sort of like immigrant mentality where it's like, yeah, that's not a thing. Like, come on. Like, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and fix it.
I'm curious how that shaped you, just your, like you said, your culture and the decisions you had to make towards sobriety.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's this in my specific, stance is that because there were so many people drinking so heavily in my family, for them to acknowledge that I had a problem would be like, we got to go back to like these 50 guys, like, and, think about what's going on there. And I think that they don't want to do that. Like that's not, and it's a huge part of celebration in the culture. And so I think that if you take that away, they wouldn't even know how to celebrate a wedding, and they wouldn't know, how to celebrate the birth of a boy child. And, I think there's those few kind of things specific to like, Indian culture and how I grew up that really prevented me from, wanting to admit there was a problem. And then again, wanting to be open about it.
Yeah, I read a interview. So I do some research on my guests, and, speaking of, and this is a different direction of culture, but I read an interview where you talk about hustle culture and burnout culture. And I'm curious how that can contribute to substance use, or either personally for you or just in general, what you've seen. It was a very interesting interview, and also just a very interesting thought of, hustle culture, burnout culture, and especially nowadays, I think as women, we feel like we have to even prove ourselves a lot, which we shouldn't have to. But
yeah, I think there's just this idea of like, you hustle until you burn out, like you are burning down, right?
Okay.
Like it's a sprint. It's not a marathon. And so I think, for me, it became that, especially when there was that sort of like looming idea that I could sell the business. And so it was like, well, it has to be bigger and bigger and bigger to be attractive enough to sell. And even if that hadn't been there was just this drive to like make it bigger and bigger and bigger without kind of like growing, but without really any idea why, right? Like that's just what you do. You make it why you make more money, and so I think that for me, it just got out of control because I don't think I was equipped to handle that type of stress. And then also it was like perfectly acceptable for me to come home and have a drink when I was working so hard. No one was questioning it, right? Like no one was like, oh, I think she drinks too much. It's like, no, she's burning it up, and she, she's trying to, needs a glass of wine after a hard day of work. And I think there's that too, right? The work hard, play hard. And so, yeah, I think that's like I think that's changing a little bit, but I think it's still part of our culture. Like it's still part of like finance, the finance world. I think it's getting a little more relaxed in like the startup world. But it's, yeah, you just feel this like, this is your one shot. And so you have to hit it and you have to hit it now. And so it's great because I don't feel like that now about Everbloom. I don't feel like that. Like if I need to take a nap, I'm taking a nap, because part of it is also I have to like practice what I preach, right? I'm telling people about self-care and like self-compassion, burning it up again. It's like not helpful to anybody.
Yeah. If you're not taking care of yourself, you won't be able to take care of others. It's putting your own oxygen mask on first. And I'm seeing this link. People that are very successful, high functioning, have to feel like they have to hustle, and that might cause them to, have unhealthy habits. But then there's that shame and stigma because I'm very successful, I'm very high functioning. I shouldn't be having what people call an issue or a problem. And so there's that shame, there's that stigma, it gets reinforced. And then eventually you may burn out or have other consequences because of that. So I'm definitely seeing this. And it almost feels like it's not talked about a lot. We tend to focus on, one area. We don't focus on like another group where, no, they're struggling. They look like they're doing well, but they're struggling.
That's the whole thing. I think that's my goal, right? Is so stigmatize that. And honestly, it's part of our culture, our society. Is I've posted on like TikTok, like I was super successful. I started a business. I sold a business. I scaled a business all while I was an alcoholic, and people will respond, that's not possible. That's not like, you couldn't have been doing as well as you think. And I'm like, no, there's like literal evidence that I was doing well. And I said, this is the type of comment, right, that stops people from getting help. It stops like a CEO of a company from admitting that they have a problem, because they know people are going to see them as, well, if you have a problem, you haven't been doing your job properly. Or you don't have a problem. You're just like making a big deal. It's like, and it's the same thing with mental health, right? Like, to admit you have a problem really puts you in a vulnerable position, I think, in your sort of like work life. And I was honestly surprised at the comments like that. Like people would say everybody around you knew. And it's like, no, they didn't. Wow. I'm telling you, like, I was like, really, they're like, people could probably smell it. And I'm like, I didn't drink at work. Like, it was just, I don't know why it caught me off guard, but I was like very quick to respond like, hey, thank you so much for your input. But I think this is the type of sentiment that keeps people sick. It keeps us sick.
It reinforces that shame.
Yeah. Because then it's like, I'm thinking, oh, well, right? Either exaggerating how big my problem was, or B, was I a disaster at work or in other aspects of my life and am not acknowledging it, type thing. And so I think there's a lot of shame there.
And it's a problem for you, the person, the individual. And I think that's the measures, like you're measuring it against yourself, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think people don't realize too, when you're like, you got to where you got for a reason. And that's because I was really good at putting rules around myself. I never drove while I was drunk, right? I never drank before a certain time. Like in the evening, I made sure like all my phone calls were done for work. I made sure I didn't send emails after I drank a certain amount. Like there was a whole set of rules in my head. I never drank at work events. It was like, and I think people don't realize that's what the high functioning is, right? Is hiding it.
And I'm curious how much of that need to have control over your own life may play into hiding it in a negative. Well, hiding it is negative, but I think some individuals that are high functioning need to have like this, or maybe not, but need to have the sense of control. And so I can control this aspect, even though it's getting me out of control. Yeah.
And I think people like, generally, I think a lot of people with addictions are kind of like perfectionists in this weird way. And so, and that a lot in the groups, that these are people that are like doing it all. Like they're moms, they're in their like church choir, they're doing parties for their kids' friends, they're throwing engagement parties, they're throwing weddings. And it's like, they're almost functioning too well. Right. And that's it. They burn themselves out and then they drink. And so I think that, yeah, there is something to that for sure.
Interesting. What lessons would you want to provide, the lessons you learned throughout your 6 years of recovery and even now?
Oh, my biggest one is like, that's the thing is I actually do love AA. I think there's so much like wisdom there. And
oh, for sure.
Yeah, I play the tape forward multiple times a day, and not just with alcohol. I do it with like everything, with like food, with everything that, has this tendency to get out of like control in any way. It's like, I just play the tape forward. Like where does this lead? How will I feel if I do this? What is the point of doing this 2 days from now? And so, yeah, and I think that is what kept me sober the, first 6 months after my divorce, was play the tape forward. Like let's say you go get a drink right now, let's be honest, you're going to come home tonight and like rattle off some fierce emails or texts, right? You're just going to be like, lose it. And then you're going to feel terrible the next day, and you're going to have to drink again. And then you'll probably send some like a regretful text, and then we're going to have to do this again. And so I think that, yeah, play the tape forward is my biggest, advice. It's like something I do so much.
Play the tape forward. So it's seeing what could be.
Yeah. Even like, honestly, even like with like, I bake a lot, right? And it's like, I have a piece of cake, right? I really want that second piece. I don't feel full, but I play the tape forward. You're going to eat that second piece of cake and be like, why? Now I feel awful. Like I can't move. And so, yeah, there's a lot of that.
It can help with all types of unhealthy habits, and choices.
Yeah, I mean, not that I have started dating, but I imagine it would help if I like, let's play the tape forward on this guy. Like, let's take the information we have, and where do we think this is going? Well, like, let's be like realistic. Where is this going?
Yeah. Where is this going? I like that. And I'm going to use that because I have a sweet tooth. I always want that second piece so hard.
Actually, interestingly, I have rules around it. I have dessert after lunch every day. I don't have a huge dessert, but I do. I eat like a couple of pieces of chocolate after lunch, and then I eat a pretty reasonable dessert after dinner. But it's like, I think that lets me regulate it in a way.
It gives yourself that permission.
Yeah,
I love that. Oh, well, I love hearing your story and how, you found yourself needing support and community, like-minded individuals who knew where you came from, who you felt like you can be vulnerable with. And since you struggled finding that, you decided to create it yourself. You're like, I'm going to fill this need, fill this gap. And, you continue to, help through that, helping others and connecting everybody. Does it cost anything to join Everbloom?
Yes. So we have different sort of levels of membership. And so, because it does take a lot of effort to kind of curate a group and then have a recovery, facilitated. And so, yeah, there's like, you can do 1 meeting a week with your group. You can do 2 meetings a week. We also have one-on-one coaching. And then everyone has access to the Slack channel once they sign up.
Okay. Is there a minimum level of engagement that someone needs to have to be part of Everbloom, or what would that look like?
Yeah. I think that I feel like the way Everbloom is, we don't have to say there's a minimum level, because sort of like, you don't want to be with only 10 people and not participate, right? And also everyone's being so vulnerable, it really makes you want to participate. But I tell people, you don't have to turn your camera on and you don't have to speak. And I don't think anyone has done that for more than maybe one meeting. After their first meeting, they're like, okay, because I think that's a huge part of the process. Otherwise, to be honest, like, you can listen to a podcast, right? If you're not going to engage, it's sort of like you can get stories and you can get information from listening to a podcast. And I think that this should be more of an active group where you're also there as support, right? So if you can't give support, how are you going to get it? And so, yeah, I think that participating is sort of part of the deal, but it's really up to the individual.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where Everbloom goes, and I think it's a wonderful concept. And yeah, so thank you so much for sharing about it. Now, Sonia, my podcast is called Hopeology, meaning the study of hope. And that's why, I love interviewing individuals from all backgrounds, all experiences. And the question I ask everybody, because it's different for everybody, is where do they find their hope? What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is what used to scare me the most, which is change. And I think that I was so, I was with my ex-husband for 18 years and assumed that would turn into 60, 70 years. Accepting the change and then accepting that like these feelings will change too, right? And then that will change. And so where I am now, a year and a half after, I could not have imagined. I could not have even imagined how good my life could be. And I think that I would still be in that place if I hadn't accepted the change. And so it gives me hope, like on a bad day, that you're not going to feel like this forever. You may not even feel like this in 10 minutes. And so I think that sort of like acceptance of the like impermanence of some things gives me so much hope now, when it used to be literally the scariest thing to me ever.
Yeah. Hope and change is interconnected.
Yeah. And I think that stability, I think you can give yourself stability, right? You can give yourself that consistency. I'm always, wherever I go, I am there. So yeah, wherever I am, it's home.
I like that. Wherever I am, it's home.
Yeah, I thought it was wherever that guy was, right? And no, turns out not true.
Your journey.
And it always has been. It just took, 43 years to figure out.
And that's okay, because I don't think we have it figured out in our 20s. I'm in my late 30s and I'm just now figuring it out. It takes that journey, and that's kind of what life is growing and figuring it out.
Yeah, it's so true.
If there's anything else you want to share with my listeners about Everbloom or yourself, or where we can find you?
Yeah, so we are joineverbloom.com, BLUME, and we're either Join Everbloom or Everbloom on every social media platform.
Awesome. I will put that in the show notes. And again, thank you so much, for being here. And I'm looking forward to seeing, Everbloom's blooming growth.
Oh, thank you so much, Christina. This was really fun.
Thank you for listening to Hopeology. If you enjoyed today's show, please leave us a review. To learn more about us or listen to past episodes, you can find us on all your podcast streaming stations. If you are interested in being a guest, or if you have any feedback, please email us at hopeologypodcast@gmail.com. You can also support our show by clicking on the link in our show notes. Please also follow our Instagram page, Hopeology Podcast, and visit our website, www.hopeologypodcast.com.